What's up, guys? Justin here with TheSketchUpEssentials.com, back with another SketchUp and Scatter tutorial for you. So in today's video, I wanted to talk about how to use the extension Scatter along with the new extension Transmutr in order to create kind of a Meadow rendering inside of SketchUp. So I will link to all of the extensions that we're using in the notes down below. Now let's go ahead and just jump into it. Alright, so we're going to use a couple different tools inside of SketchUp in order to create this, and we're just going to kind of see what we can create. I'm fascinated by the idea of using an extension to organically scatter objects inside of SketchUp, and so I just wanted to see kind of what we could do with this. So we're going to start off, and you're going to need, so we're going to use the extensions Enscape, Skatter, and Transmutr in order to randomly add things to our terrain, but we're going to start off just by modeling our terrain. And so I'm just going to take our terrain and I'm going to make probably a 300 foot by 300 foot grid, and I'm just going to set the spacing at 5 feet. So using sandbox tools, I'll create a 300 by 300 foot grid right in here, and I'm just going to select it all and reverse my faces. And what we're going to do now is we're just going to use sandbox tools in order to just kind of randomly generate some hills and mounds. And really what I'm doing in the background here and around the edges is I'm lifting this up so you can't see the horizon line. So when we actually render this, what we're going to do is we're going to get a camera view kind of like this one. So we'll be at about eye height. And so I'm just creating some hills here so you're not actually going to be able to see the horizon line very well. And you can also add some kind of random ups and downs over here. You might adjust the radius of this a little bit just to give you a little bit more variation in the size. And there's other tools you could use to do this as well, but I think this is going to work fine for this particular demonstration. So I'm just going to add some kind of random lumps in here, and we'll go ahead and call this good. So this is going to be our terrain that we're going to use in order to render this. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click outside this group, and I'm going to use the Soften Edges tool in your tray in order to soften this face. And so once you soften this face, you can see what that does is that hides all of the geometry in here. So now if you come in here and look at this, this is going to be nice smooth geometry. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to apply a grass texture. And for this one, I'm going to just use the SketchUp grass light green texture. And the reason for that is because we're going to use Enscape's grass function in order to add our grass in here. So right now, if we were to take this and go ahead and run this in Enscape by clicking the play button, you're going to see that what this is going to do is this is going to give us a face in here, and depending on your settings, it's already going to give you some grass on this face. So you can see how because we applied a material called grass in here, it found the word grass and automatically applied that grass material. And if you're not seeing that, maybe go into your Enscape settings, probably in your Enscape material settings, and you're going to want to make sure that this grass light green material, when you have that selected, has a type set to grass. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to adjust this grass so that it has some more height and some more variation, specifically the variation, because the way grass grows in the real world, it doesn't really grow at a uniform height, and so we want there to be some variation in here so this looks a little more realistic. And so I wish I had a way to pin that to the top, but I really don't. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag that height variation up to something higher, like maybe 85 or something like that. And the other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag the height of my grass up. So I want this to look kind of like a wild field. And so now that we've got all this grass shown up on here, this looks a lot more realistic with the height and the height variation going on in there. So, and you might drag that up almost to the maximum in order to just really give you that kind of varying grass look in here. But what we have now is we have our terrain that has the grass applied to it. Well, now what we want to do is we want to use the extension Scatter in order to start adding vegetation and some rocks and some other things like that. And so the first thing I want to do is I just want to add some like flowers and other things to this meadow so that it looks a little bit more realistic. And one of the nice things about the extension Scatter is it has a library of things that you can put in here if you want to make that adjustment. And in this case, it's got something in here. It's a daisy that you can kind of scatter in your grass just to make it look like there's a little bit more going on there. So we're just going to take that, and so we're going to click on the library button, we're going to click on the daisy, and we specifically want to select the option for proxies, and we want to check the box for render only. And so once we do that, once we've selected the daisies, it's going to ask us to give it a host. And in this case, the host is going to be this group right here. So this is the host, is the thing that we want to scatter these things along. And so when I click on this, what that's going to do is that's going to come in here and that's going to render in daisies or add daisies along this whole thing. And we don't necessarily want quite so many daisies in here. So what we want to do is we want to go down and we want to adjust the distribution to something lower. So I might change this to like 0.05 or something like that. So I'm just going to type that value in. I'm going to hit the tab key, and that's going to reduce the number of daisies that are shown in here. And one thing I don't necessarily need, first of all, this is still a lot of daisies, so I think I'm going to reduce this even more. So I'm just going to change this to 0.25. That's a few less. Maybe 0.35 is kind of what we're looking for here. And I'm just going to go ahead and click the button for regenerate. And what that's going to do is that's going to reload your daisies into Enscape. So you can see how now you've got some daisies kind of scattered in here. And one thing I don't like though is we've scattered all of these in here, but they're all on the hills and you can't really see them unless you fly up to them. So you've got all these objects that are in here in your rendering, and they don't really need to be in here because they're so far away from your camera, because your camera view for this scene is going to be way back over here. And so probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in here, and there's actually a tool down below where I can exclude areas. It's called clipping areas. And what you can do is you can add a paint area. So if I click on this, I can add a paint area, and I can tell it that in this area I want it to exclude wherever I paint. So, and we need to increase the brush radius by a lot, so we're going to put our brush radius up to like 300, or even more than that. I'm going to put it up to like 1,000. So that's going to make my brush a lot bigger, and I'm just going to come paint along this face, and I'm basically telling that to exclude that area on the hill over there. And I'll probably do something over here too, but with a smaller brush area. So now this brush may be like a 350 or something like that. But I'm going to tell it to exclude along these hills over here, because that's something we're not going to be able to see anyway. And so now, if we click regenerate, you can see how we've regenerated the number of objects and cut it in half or even less than in half. But inside of Enscape, you can't really tell because you couldn't see the flowers beyond like this point anyway. So now we don't have a whole bunch of objects back in here making everything run slow. And so now what I want to do is, we're pretty much done with this, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to name this, because we're going to want to manage our different things that we're scattering in here. So for this one, I'm just going to call this one flowers. And I'm going to click the regenerate button. And if I go over to my render list, that's going to give me the list of all the things that are being scattered. You can see that this is called flowers. And so now we've got our flowers scattered in here. Well, now what I want to do is I want to add some rocks. And I specifically want to add some rocks maybe over here on these hills. But we can go ahead and place it along this whole thing for right now. So in order to do that, we're just going to go into our render list, and we're just going to click the plus button to add a new scatter. And we can call this one something like boulders or rocks or whatever we want to call this. So we could just call this rocks. And so what I want to do for this one though is I want to bring in an external model. I want to bring in a model that I downloaded from Megascans, and I will link to Megascans in the notes down below. This is an object from their free library. So in this case, they've got these rock models, and so I want to import these in. Well, I need to import these in using the extension Transmutr, because these come in as a model type that SketchUp usually doesn't import all that well. So I'm going to go into the Transmutr extension, and I'm going to click on this right here. So when I click on that, that's going to pop up the Transmutr window. And so what I've done is I've downloaded those rock files, but I want to bring them in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go find those files, and in this case I've kept it in a Megascans folder, and it's just going to be this rock shop 2K. And these are all different levels of detail of these rocks. I'm probably going to go with the level of detail 1. You can see how you can see the different sizes in here of those files. So everything we're doing here is trying to keep our SketchUp model size manageable. But I'm just going to go ahead and double click on that. And that's going to bring me into the Transmutr window where I can come in here and make some changes. So I'm going to adjust the up axis in here so that it's the Y axis. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go load in the materials. And if you do this from Megascans Bridge, this comes in automatically. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to load in what's known as the albedo map, which is basically the image file that gets applied to this rock. So I'm going to load in that particular map. I also want to load in the bump map that gets applied to this rock to make it look more realistic. There's some other maps in here too if you want to load them in, like a displacement map and things like that. We're going to go ahead and call this good, and I'm just going to go back to my geometry. And so what makes this really powerful is since I'm using Enscape to render this, I can check the box for export as Enscape proxy, and that'll bring this in as a proxy file, meaning it'll bring this in as a file that doesn't show all of the geometry inside of SketchUp, so it won't slow down your model in the same way. And the only other thing I'm going to change is I'm going to change my placeholder to just a bounding box wireframe. That's just going to give me a wireframe around this rock. And I'm going to click the button for transmute. And it's going to ask me to save this somewhere. I'm going to go ahead and click save. I'll replace the one I had in there, but then it's going to allow me to drop that into my model somewhere. So in this case, I'm just going to drop it into my model right here. So now if I was to go into my Enscape render, you can see how this rock gets brought in. And you can see how it's a really realistic rock. It's got like bump maps applied to it and everything else. And so what I want to do is I want to add a few of these scattered throughout my scene. And so in order to do that, we're just going to use scatter again. And remember how we created our rocks scatter? What we're going to do is we're going to tell it that we're going to scatter this object right here, and then we're going to tell it that our host is going to be this surface. So we're going to mouse over it and we're going to click on it. And obviously this is way too many rocks. You don't need this many rocks inside your model. And so what we're going to do is I'm actually going to change this to a uniform distribution, and I'm just going to adjust my spacing. So for this one, I'm going to set my spacing to something like 1,000 on the X and 1,000 on the Y. And so what that does is that's going to bring in just a few of these. Maybe I'll bring this down even a little bit to like 800 and 800. That'll bring in a few more. And we're going to go ahead and click the button for regenerate. So when we click the button for regenerate, you're going to see that all of these rocks are going to come in here. And what I don't like about this is these all come in very uniform. You can see how it's not really getting rotated or changed or anything like that. So it looks kind of unnatural, and that's not really what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to start changing our random transformation. So we're going to set this so this can randomly rotate and transform our different objects inside of our model. So we're just going to set this so that the scale can be adjusted. We're going to set this so the rotation can be adjusted, and we're also going to allow it to do some translation adjustment. So what this is going to allow us to do is this is going to allow us to adjust how randomly this can rotate these on the X and Y axis. So you can see how I'm placing this between -5 and 25 degrees. We're also going to set this so that we can change the translation of these. So like right now, if I was to click regenerate, these are all in here, but they're kind of sitting up on the ground a little bit more than I want them to. So I want to give them some kind of random up and down. And mostly I want these to be down. I don't want them to be up because I don't want them floating above the ground. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my, I think it's my Z translation. So it's going to randomize where these are moved on the z-axis up and down, and I'm going to tell it that I want it to move these anywhere from -5 to -25. So you can see how some of these are now down inside my ground. Now if I click regenerate and I look at these rocks, they're not really sitting up above the ground like they were before. So this gives me kind of a random look at my rocks right here. And they look a little bit silly right now just because we don't have any trees or bushes or anything else. So it just looks like this kind of like random rocky field. So let's add a couple other things real quick. This video is getting kind of long. So I'm going to do this kind of fast. I'm going to go in and I'm going to add some trees. And so for my trees, for this scatter, I'm going to open the scatter library and I'm just going to find the tree 01 that's in here. We're going to load these as proxies, and so we're going to bring in some randomly placed trees inside of our model. So we're just going to click the load button and it's going to load these in, and then we're going to set our host to this face right here. And in this case, you can see how that brings in way too many trees again. We don't want nearly that many, and so for this one, we'll adjust our spacing down to something like, we don't want a lot of trees, so we'll start with 850 and see what that gives us. So we'll just adjust this to 850 and we'll click regenerate. Well, that's going to bring our trees in at that kind of random spacing. So you can see how those trees are in here. And one of the things we're going to do when we do this is we're going to adjust our shadows so they look a little bit softer like this. So you can see how in the morning the shadows look a lot more soft and interesting than they do in the evening. So you can see how what this does is this really kind of adds some realism to our scene. So I'm also going to come in here. So we'll go ahead and call this trees. We'll bring in some bushes. And I do want to note that you can pretty much do this with any kind of model from pretty much anywhere when you're using the extension Transmutr. So you can download models from model libraries and other places like that pretty much whenever you want to. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to adjust this down just a little bit. So 0.025 maybe, and I'm going to regenerate that. So now that gives me some nice bushes that are added to my scene. All right, so the last thing I'm going to do, at least in Enscape for right now, is I'm going to come in here and I'm just going to adjust my shadows so this looks a little bit more realistic. And so there's a time of day which is kind of early in the morning, and so I'm just holding the shift key and dragging this across where the sunlight and the shadows looks really good. So you can see how about 7 o'clock in the morning I'm getting really soft, really good looking shadows coming off of all of my trees and my things that I've scattered in here. And so I really like the way this image looks, and obviously there's some other things we could do. We could scatter some thicker grass in here or add some different materials on our hills or things like that, but for right now I'm pretty happy with the way this looks. So all I'm going to do is I'm just going to export this, and in Enscape that's a Shift F11. It'll go in and render this image, and then that image will get exported to wherever you've got Enscape set up to put those images. So that's where I'm going to end this video. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you thought. Did you find this helpful? Do you like videos like this? I just love having that SketchUp conversation with you guys. If you like this video, please remember to click that like button down below. If you're new around here, remember to click that subscribe button for new SketchUp content every week. If you like what I'm doing in this channel, please consider supporting me on Patreon. Every little bit helps, even if it's only $1 a month. So make sure you check out that link in the notes down below. But in any case, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I really appreciate it, and I will catch you in the next video. Thanks, guys.